This week's podcast episode was originally broadcast in January 2026 during our Social Talent Live webinar. If you missed this free event when it was broadcasted live, be sure to sign up for the next one over on socialtalent.com/live.
But without further ado, I would love to introduce our first guest. Some of you may know Kevin. Kevin is the co-founder of Exec TA Social and Neuroverse. He's been a guest on the show before. He's previously led global TA teams in Ericsson, in Oracle, in IBM, and lots of high growth, fast growing companies around the world. He's, I think, to be one of the leading voices and minds on productivity, on capacity, on org structure and TA. And Kevin is always a great person to have on the show and a really smart person to listen to. Kevin, I hope you're feeling very Kevin today. As I know, this topic actually was inspired by you, inspired by something you said to me over a casual coffee back in San Diego a few months ago when you were on your way home from Talent Connect, where we started talking about productivity and capacity. And you're the one who kind of challenged me on this to say, we should stop talking about productivity. We don't want that to be the conversation. People should be reframed around capacity. Do you want to introduce your ideas and thoughts and why that's something you feel strongly about?
Yeah, for sure. Just to comment on the poll, first of all, firstly, it's good that nobody's having to prioritize headcount or OPEX reduction. Now, hopefully that's a good sign of what's happening and not the fact that nobody's had their 2026 budgets yet. And so that's next week's poll. But anyway, but I think actually what you've got in the poll with the at least half the participants suggesting the quality of hiring managers, candidates' experience in some ways talk to this, because productivity and focusing just solely on productivity is a race to the bottom, right? And that's been the case for some time, because what we've had is these, as we've gone into, various different iterations of what a TA leader needs to do, and that becoming confused with it being not just a value-based services approach, but more of a defensive metric. So rather than focusing on what is a strategic imperative, which would be capacity, is very much focused on being a defensive mechanism, which is, I can do this with this, and that's the sole value to the organization. So.
I remember you used to talk about, if you're okay with bringing this up, back in your IBM days, you would talk about how every year you were told to give 10% more hiring with 10% less budget. Yeah. That when you joined that company, you famously told the story to lots of us in TA, and you've told it on some of our podcasts or webinars, how the metrics were you could game them, right? You could easily look like a great TA person when you pick a metric that's nice around, let's say, time to hire or something, and you can look like you're being more productive all the time. But to your point, if you get into the business side and you are more aligned to being a function that supports business growth, business outcomes, rather than a cost center, it's really about a mindset, which involves many things, not just language, but metrics, how you organize yourself, how you budget, how you talk to the business as well. Would that be fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, since there's roles where I definitely take 10% reduction for 10% more. That seems conservative in comparison to the ask of some TA leaders these days. But it was at scale. It was over 60,000 hires, so there was some pain to be ensured. But yeah, no, it's absolutely that. I mean, it is this thing around, if you box yourself into a corner where your pure value is, this is the productivity play, it's asking, how can you, the question that comes at you is, how can you do more with less? So you become a victim and you become a servant to that narrative. Whereas if you start thinking about capacity and this is what I have to work with, and how can I elevate the services and differentiate the services, the conversation firstly becomes more strategic, but it becomes, this is what I can deliver. This is what we can do. And you start to go, more about using it as an offensive weapon as opposed to defending your position. Because with automation coming in, and it's coming in, I'm very public about it. I take quite an extreme position. I get a lot of criticism for it because I'm the one that says, listen, these teams are shrinking. Stop hanging on to these traditional models. If you're going to hang on, you're going to get caught out. But that doesn't mean it's the end of TA. It doesn't mean it's the end of the services that they're going to evolve and they're going to include. But what it does do, if you're extolling your value as purely this productivity, this homogenized, amortized way of I do X with X recruiters and that's my value, and that's how we're measured. What you do is you make yourself vulnerable to automation, because it becomes then, well, if you can do this, why can't it be done with some degree of automation? But if you're actually the value-based conversation, and you frame your success around the capacity, and you start to think about differentiated services, and you start to think about leaning in to the work that can be done. That's when you start to take a more elevated position. You start to think about, well, this is not about just the nuanced value through just being a machine and the sausage factory of grinding it through, but actually being a strategic part of the organization.
So I share that extreme view, as you pointed out, around where we're going. I think there's only two routes to go in TA for modern TA teams. One is you have to do the same amount of hiring with half the team, half the budget, which probably means they need half the leader, right? Which means they don't need you anymore, whoever that leader is. Or you could do twice as many things for the organization, drive twice as much value with the same team, the same budget, and keep your job, right? And it's which one do you want to choose? When you see that, expanding their remit piece, right? Because you run a co-run Exec TA Social, which is a community of TA leaders all around the world where you meet regularly. You have online platforms, you have meetups, you speakers come in, you're talking with so many different TA leaders. What examples of remit expansion have you seen that are interesting, that you think are scalable for anyone listening here?
Yeah. No, we do. I mean, we have kind of 1,400 heads of TA in the community. So we do get this really nice barometer because it's from all sizes of companies. But just to touch on a point you were just saying then, just before I go in and talk about the areas you kind of elevate into. You're right around this, as automation starts to take some of these things and we start to think about that. I met, and I'm not going to name names because, I don't know where they are in announcing. I met with a very high profile, very highly thought of applicant tracking system recently with some of their board members. And the view amongst them was, we should give this away for free. This is our future's in consumption. Like, if we're going to have this automation come in and we remove things like the screening, the scheduling, even parts of the collaboration process, and we take it at scale, where's the value in just charging for a platform that delivers a service? Like, give the platform, turn it into a mobile phone, give the iPhone for free and charge for the data. Give the razors away for free and charge a fortune for the blades. That's where we're going. We've seen SaaS companies outside of recruitment and HR do that, and that's definitely what you're going to start to see within talent acquisition, because they know that the scale element is going to be so easy to consume going forward when there's not a human intervention blocking it down. But I think there's a couple of places where you can see it. So if you move away, if you stay with the technology for a second, I think the first thing is you're going to see these new roles crop up within talent acquisition, which really show that optimizing value within the changing world is going to be really important. So I think you're going to see, you have high scale automation and you have agentic workflows that are making decisions. You're going to see things like I've talked about them before, things like the auditors and the people that control and protect the organization. They're obvious ones, but I think you're going to start to see some TA roles that really look like high frequency traders, that really look like these people that sit in these large scale banks that do micro trades, that are constantly looking and adjusting to optimize the process, especially when you're in large scale organizations. I think you mentioned my IBM days. I was thinking we were getting 1.3 to 1.6 million applicants a month, right? 800 recruiters. I mean, can you imagine, on scale to that? So you're going to have these areas where you're going to have these roles coming in, and you're going to have these definitely look different. But in terms of where TA can create more value, it's definitely got to go and start eating some other people's lunches. One of the ones that I really like, which was first introduced to me at a session I was with another one of the guests today when we were doing a session last year, was that they were trialing that they start to bridge the gap between day one and when L&D and talent management really care, when they've created some value and they're in the ecosystem and they're known and they're recognizable in the HR system. So you have this window from day one where talent acquisition would historically stop. That's a very vulnerable time for any employee, because they're new, they don't know their way, and they're kind of, it's a time where they kind of go into this forgotten land and say, well, we've hired you for value, prove that value, and then we'll assess whether we're going to invest in you and what we're going to put around you and what your promotion velocity is. But actually going a bit further down, when TA has curated this relationship digitally and with humans to land that person in the organization, being able to move further downstream with them and taking them up to their first performance reviews, or taking them through their first couple of quarters, or taking them through the next iterations, I think is where, is a real opportunity. I have to say, and I don't want to become the target of hostilities from the workforce planning communities, but I have got to say in 2026, it's still no better than in 2006, when I first moved to Oracle, and it was rudimentary then and worked off spreadsheets. We're not getting it to the point where we have now. I've always said that as a TA leader, don't judge me on my ability to deliver, judge me on my ability to react, because, there are so many macro and microeconomic variables. There's company performance, there's human intervention that moves us in a different direction. So for me, there is a really strong piece around being able to really kind of create value in those other areas, like down at the bottom end, where you're thinking about sequencing how that demand comes in, how it's triaged by the business and when you get it. And even now, again, in 2026, when my teams have got roles, it's already been open in the minds of the business leaders for a month or 2 months or even a quarter, because they signed it off. And it's just gone through this triaging process internally and this validation process. And it's not, hey, the business need was there and we're now on the back foot trying to execute that. So I think there's a, post-hire opportunity for sure, but definitely also pre-hire opportunities to move in and start to influence areas. And I have no problem at all with going after somebody else's lunch. Like I really have been critical over some of those other functions over the years and how they've created value that pulls through to TA. Like these things live in a box. I think more progressive CHROs are starting to bring talent together in an orchestration type of way, which we talk about, but also L&D. Like, everyone, we want to be a company of internal mobility. Well, why does nobody internally look like the people that the hiring manager wants to hire? So, that's not going to work, is it? And so, yeah, so I think these things definitely, and I think TA can put itself at the center of that. I think it's a strong, solid TA leader can put themselves in the center of that discussion.
Do you think the budget pressures that everyone's under, right, and has been under for the last 2-3 years, is an opportunity? Because you see L&D teams cut, other talent teams cut, mobility teams cut. Is that the opportunity for a strong TA leader with a strong team to step up and say, I can do that. We can do that better. We're already touching in that space. Or even is it, the skills first movement or resurgent, which is a whole other topic of by itself. But do you think that also gives TA the opportunity to start pulling on those strings of other departments and taking more control and showing that, hey, we can be more commercial, we can do it better?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you and I were chatting this morning, actually, when you were in this country, before you're back in that country. You and I were chatting about a company that I won't name that kind of been talking to recently, where they have put talent at the very center, straight into the founders. It's quite a large company as well. It's not like a 200-person scale-up company. It's quite a large company, and they put talent straight into the founders, and they don't have an interference, as they would call it, from the human resources side of the business, because they have to start dragging talent acquisition to start thinking about, instead of the talent acquisition being the servant of L&D and the talent management strategy, talent acquisition has the demand of the business. It holds the demand of the business. It holds the success of the business in the eyes of the founders of this company. So therefore, talent acquisition takes an elevated position and then starts to effectively dish out the orders to these things and say, we're going to execute this. What are you doing to fulfill that need? What are you doing to incubate the talent? What are you training and developing? And then almost create an aggregate score to say, this is how you're performing against the requirement of the talent acquisition function. And the talent acquisition function is being set up to be effectively a commercial entity that proves its value back by extracting the value of its suppliers and effectively creating the supply chain performance. So, we can roll an ERP on top of them, but effectively extracting a supply chain performance model. So I think it's huge.
So Kevin, we've got two very strong leaders in Sarah and Seth coming on, who are commercial. They're able to talk the language of the business, get budgets, make change, look at capacity well. What are the general traits you see in leaders that do this well? Because they're in the minority, I think, in the TA community, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So when you see them, what do they look like? What are they doing? What are their activities? What are their behaviors that maybe others can copy that give them that credibility?
I think Sarah's going to touch on one, so I'm not going to steal her thunder, because one of them I very strongly agree with, actually. It's around some of the simplicity of what we need to do as well, and the hygiene factors. But what I see is the ones that I think are going to win the race and really be able to demonstrate that they're not passengers reacting to demand. They're able to be in front of the demand and be able to be responsive in the correct way, are the ones that are dropping the old TA methodologies, the old ways of thinking, the ones that are hanging on to, the extreme narrative of, you can never be replaced. Your company always needs you, recruiter. It's not entirely true. Parts of your jobs cannot be replaced, but many of them can. And so I think the ones that are starting to lean in, and to answer the question of the poll earlier, that start to think about improving the quality of the experience, really focus on the touch points and drop in some of the legacy things behind. And just very quickly, a really recent example, and I've spoken this before with you, and I get on my high horse about wastage. The TA leaders do not focus on wastage. We are a services company. I met with a TA leader not so long ago that was arguing with me that they didn't want automation and scheduling, and it was a really important touch point for their candidates, and that they didn't want to drop it. I said, well, how many interviews do you do per hire? And they're like, well, 10 first stage and then 5 second. And I told them it's like 23 interviews per hire took place in total to make one hire. Like, what's that? That's like 96% wastage on that activity of scheduling for that. Why don't you just have one person that phones everybody that you think is going to get the job and give them a really nice, lovely virtual coffee? That would be far more productive and engaging than something that has a 96% wastage ratio. Right? It's insane, but they're hanging on to these traditional things, So I think those that can lean in to say, I want to create this experience, and I don't want to become a servant to the tools. I want to create these experiences and then build around that. I think they're the ones that are really good.